All of us have had that experience. You're excited to play some new video game, ripped open the plastic packaging, jammed the cartridge into the system, and got this. Oh no. This is terrible, janky, barely playable. After a few minutes of play, maybe reading the instruction manual to see if you were missing something, maybe calling that friend whose uncle worked at Nintendo and swore it was going to be the greatest game in the world, you took out the game and stared at it, wondering if you had truly just wasted your hard-earned birthday gift on this piece of crap. How did a game this bad get made? Surely someone recognized that it was terrible. Surely someone knew the pits in E.T. were annoying as hell. Somebody had to notice that flying through the rings in Superman 64 was just god-awful. And if you ever played Top Gun, you absolutely remember how impossible it was to land on the aircraft carrier. For a variety of reasons, these awful games were made anyway. In today's video, we're going to talk about how and why awful games in the 80s and 90s came to be. I don't want to miss something here. There are two types of bad games. First, there are the games that are terrible and no one really cared. You know the ones. They were just shovelware designed to make a quick buck. Second, there are games that were honest efforts, but still failed catastrophically. And yes, let's be clear, the two categories are not mutually exclusive. First, let's set the stage. And let's do that by talking about the early shovelware games that were so bad they had no business being made. Of course, shovelware is still made today, but it was very different in the 80s and 90s. In this early video game market, when the industry was still in its infancy, bad games were much more forgivable. After all, the technology was new, and there weren't nearly as many experienced developers. Video game companies, still starting out, really didn't know what they were doing. Now, obviously, that's not to say that good video games weren't being made, despite the very significant technological limitations of the time. This early era saw some remarkable, technology-pushing games, including genre-defining games like Adventure, Yar's Revenge, Pitfall, and so much more. These games, to the infinite credit of the developers that made them, were able to wring every ounce of graphics and new technology from the very limited systems that were available. The early 80s also saw Atari make a key mistake. They didn't lock their system. In other words, they allowed for third parties to create games for the system regardless of the quality of those games. That meant that anyone with an ounce of expertise and access to the necessary hardware and software could make video games for the Atari 2600. That resulted in a glut of games. The profit motivation during this period cannot be understated. Atari, the biggest video game company of the early 80s, was generating ridiculous amounts of money. So much so that it was, at one point, the fastest growing company in world history. In 1982, Atari earned $2 billion in revenue and turned a $320 million profit. Desperate to get in on this rise in profit, developers proliferated and created games as fast as possible in order to make a quick buck. The first third-party games were good. Activision created classics, including Pitfall, River Raid, and Kaboom. Other high-quality development houses followed. Imagic made Demon Attack. Parker Brothers made Frogger and Qbert, but others followed, with much less of a desire to create good games. Data Age produced abysmal games like Snake and Warplock. Quaker Oats, Quaker Oats, the food company, bought US Games, which produced winners like Sneak and Peek, which was actually hide and seek. Oh God. And then there was American Multiple Industries, which produced games like Custer's Revenge, which was really a sexual assault simulator. Let's put it another way. Activision was founded in 1979. By the time 1983 rolled around, there were at least 158 different third-party developers. Of course, this killed the industry. The games that came out were crap. An estimated 450 total Atari 2600 games came out, and one of the chief problems of those games was an utter lack of quality control. Atari learned a bitter lesson the hard way. Monitor what comes into your system. With no way of stopping bad games from appearing, the market became saturated, leading to the ultimate decline of the Atari 2600 and serving as one of the chief reasons for the North American video game crash of 1983. Weirdly enough, making games was actually too easy. These days, as we all know, it takes months, if not years, to create good games. There was a real lack of knowledge at the time about what customers wanted and what they needed in order to enjoy a game. The low barrier of entry to create a game meant that companies were just pushing out crap. That would change with the rise of the Famicom, which premiered in Japan in 1983 and North America in 1985. Nintendo was smart enough to learn from Atari's very significant mistakes and created strict controls over their third-party developers, limiting the amount of games that any developer could create in a year and ensuring that Nintendo had final approval of all games. While Nintendo's practices would be criticized as draconian, they were done to protect the integrity of the system and limit bad games. Of course, other reasons for video game snafus became more prominent. First, the obvious, it's not as if greed went away. Corporations, be it first or third-party developers, still sought to make as much money as possible. So, let me say right off the bat, that's okay. I mean, it's good. Yay, capitalism. Profits are always going to be part of the game industry because people have the audacity to want to do things like buy their groceries and retire with dignity. Weirdos. The problem is when developers put short-term profits or the ability to turn a quick buck over game quality, something that we know happened an incomprehensible amount. That is how you get games that make no sense, but are still designed to turn a quick buck. This includes licensed tie-ins, which I did a video on, link in the description, that sought to take advantage of popular video games, even though the licensed property might have had no obvious gameplay elements. Examples of this from the 80s and 90s are nearly endless. Back to the Future 2 and 3, the infamous E.T. from Atari, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, the list goes on. While this practice has been reduced today, it hasn't been completely eliminated. Hello, Lord of the Rings Gollum. Related to these disasters is corporate malfeasance and just utter incompetence. Sometimes the reason for a bad game isn't anything advanced. Corporations are just dumb. Let's take Superman 64. After signing a new development deal, developers at Titus Interactive had to deal with a new team from the license holders, Warner Brothers and DC Comics. This team was so bad that they wanted Titus to change Superman from a platformer to a city simulation builder. Right. Of course, E.T. is another great example. The geniuses at Atari negotiated late for the rights to the game, acquired those rights, and then forced the game to be developed in weeks instead of the usual 6 months. The insane crunch is the chief reason why E.T. is so commonly regarded as one of the worst of all time, a game so bad it had to be buried in concrete. It's also worth noting that some developers just sucked. Let's take LJN. The company made some of the worst Nintendo games of the era, including Back to the Future 2 and 3, Friday the 13th, and more. Indeed, LJN built a reputation for making terrible games, usually licensed. The games were bad for a variety of reasons. The constant emphasis on licensed titles made all of their games seem like a cash grab. LJN also apparently outsourced the development of their game to third-party developers, and this relatively low-quality development, combined with a lack of adequate quality control and playtesting, meant that the games were often of extremely low quality. These same issues led to games that were just buggy and broken. All of this became a staple of LJN, and as the developer continued its operations, it really didn't get any better. Two more problems must be acknowledged, one of which remains a major issue today, one of which less so. First, the remaining problem, time crunch. For a variety of reasons, developers would often fire out games as fast as possible, or fight to meet deadlines to get the games out the door. Buggy or low-quality games were often the result. Like most studios, time crunch was more real for some games rather than others. For example, Master System games infamously ran on a 3-month deadline, something that many developers noted led directly to major quality issues and forced the release of games with inadequate testing or poor quality features. Pac-Man for the Atari 2600 is another famous example. A deadline of March 1982 meant that developer Todd Fry had to work 80-hour weeks to get the game out the door. Yes, the game was a commercial success, but its lack of fidelity to the original game, link in the description for that video, meant that the game had major quality issues and some pretty horrendous features. Second, less of a problem today, but still an issue. Inadequate playtesting. Simply put, many developers did not have appropriate playtesting mechanisms in place. Of course, things were different then. There was no early access, no alpha builds released to the public. As a result, many games got developed and released without testing and remediation for its most annoying or straight-up broken features. This included elements like overly difficult bad guys, repetitive gameplay, horrific visual components, and the like. In some cases, the inadequate testing meant that there were game-breaking bugs. For example, the PC port of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles had a jump that was literally impossible, torturing players who thought that there had to be a way to progress when there was not. A new version of the game ultimately had to be released. The game Mindstorm for the Vectrex is another example. In that game, players who manage to make it to the 13th level cannot progress any further as the game simply crashes and deletes the high score. That seems like a jerk move. These days, professional testing and early access have helped to control for these issues, but before that, ouch. Perhaps no game actually nails all of these circumstances like E.T. It was released in 1983 and is one of the most extensively documented and infamous bad video games of all time. A game so bad that many have, wrongly, credited it with killing the entire video game industry. The history of this game is extremely well documented in Once Upon Atari, the book by Howard Scott Warshaw, who developed the game. Link in the description if you are interested in buying it. As Warshaw himself noted, the game pretty much hit every sin of bad early developed games. It was rushed out the door to get onto shelves by the 1982 holiday season, and only a few months after E.T.'s world premiere. That rush meant that Warshaw only had 5 weeks to develop the game, resulting in an insane crunch and poorly fleshed out concepts. The gameplay was repetitive and annoying, and in his book, Warshaw delineates exactly how he would revamp the game if given the opportunity to do so, discussing new features and additional measures of orientation that he would create. There was no playtesting, both due to time and the simple fact that Atari believed that any game with E.T. would be a hit. That leads to another problem. Atari themselves didn't even realize how necessary game quality was, despite the fact that they were developers of the system. The end result was this: E.T. the video game, often referred to as the worst video game of all time. Now, it's worth keeping in mind this is all from an earlier era of video games. Newer games, of course, can have many issues remedied or addressed via day one patches or repeated updates. That's why so many games that come out today are now pure jank, but fear not, because the developers have released a roadmap on how the game will be functional and fun. The advent of new technology and decades of experience means that newer games can be saved. That's not to say that they always are. Some games, like The Day Before, are so bad that they actually kill their studios. Other games, like No Man's Sky, start out so poorly that they become infamous, but ultimately pull off incredible recoveries and become something extraordinary. As always, I turn it over to you. What did I get right, and what factors did I miss? Let us know in the comments below, and please, give us your thoughts on some of the worst video games you ever played. More importantly, if you liked this video, and I certainly hope you did, please do like, subscribe, or click on the next video that the almighty algorithm has loaded up for you. Furthermore, if you want to support us even more, please do consider becoming a channel member. By doing so, you can support the channel, get access to exclusive content, chat options, surveys, shoutouts, and more. Thank you so much to our members, Christian Villegag, Justin Miles, and Robin Mayfield for your membership. Yay, Christian, Justin, and Robin. Have a wonderful day out there, my friends. Thank you so much for watching, and hope you enjoyed this video as much as I liked making it. Take care.